of us were arrested, not to be taken advantage, by these foreign countries who claim that they've helped us. They've never helped us. They were fighting their civil wars. If there are countries that helped us, no more than two. Most of them, they are parasites.
Let's speak now to Piers Pigou. He is a senior consultant at the International Crisis Group for Southern Africa. He joins us now from Johannesburg. Thanks so much for being with us, Piers. This problem, it's not going away. It's been years that poor South Africans have complained that they're being overlooked for jobs they're qualified for in favor of foreigners who are, cheaper and won't actually get the same employment protection that South Africa can grant. What's actually being done and been done just to address that complaint?
Well, it's difficult to know exactly what has been done to address the complaint. As you point out, this has been an ongoing problem. I mean, I was involved in research in the late 1990s that touched on this issue about attitudes towards foreigners being blamed for all sorts of things, from rising unemployment to crime and so forth. And we see in some of the latest research that has been conducted last year that these viewpoints are held by a significant number of people in South Africa that feeds into this kind of xenophobic posturing, aspects of which you saw in your copy this evening. The issue for many people, of course, in terms of South Africans living cheek by jowl with foreigners within their communities is indeed a lived reality, and perceptions that foreigners are taking away jobs and opportunities are easily manipulated in this context. And unfortunately, one sees the kind of actions of organizations like South Africa First, who were marching there in your clip, and the individual, Mr. Khumalo, who is very well known for his xenophobic viewpoints and misrepresentations of realities in play. But, we do need to get some facts on the table, and we do need to get some proper messaging to these affected communities. And that's precisely what government's National Action Plan, launched in March last year, is intended to do.
Okay, because, you say there's a perception when you're talking about xenophobia that, foreigners are to blame for all these projects. But is it just perception, or is there some reality to it? Because there's also an issue with South Africans who don't trust other South Africans, from those who employ domestic help to others who need, low-skilled workers, but would rather just hire someone from Zimbabwe or Malawi because they'll say, they work harder, they don't demand as much, they might not have connections to local crime networks. I've heard all sorts of things said from the people that can employ these low-skilled workers and intentionally do not.
Yes, I think there's a fair amount of that going on. And we've also seen over the years a number of foreigners from the region having established themselves in the long term in South Africa and benefiting from residential status, from special work permits. For example, there are almost 200,000 Zimbabweans that are in the country on special permits at the moment. This is as a result, of course, of the politics and economics in Zimbabwe, which has forced a number of people out. So I think the reality for many South Africans is real in terms of their concerns, but it's the way in which these things are represented and manipulated by particular interest groups. It would seem, for example, to take the trucking example that we're using here, over 300 trucks have been burnt up in the last 3 years in this country in relation to this issue. But those associations calling for the removal of foreign drivers have no credible answers on what to do for South African trucks that are heading north into the region, into Zimbabwe, into Zambia, into the Congo, and so forth. What are we expecting? Are we expecting retaliation? And we're already hearing from some of those countries that there will be retaliation if foreign truck drivers, for example, continue to be targeted in this way. So, the approach of threats and the use of violence for leverage is not going to help us with a sustainable solution.
Right. Violence is never the solution. But I want to ask you something else. Is it fair to classify, because we keep talking about this broader topic of xenophobia in South Africa, and I'm wondering what kind of proportion we're talking about of those people protesting are actually xenophobic? Do they really have a dislike or fear of foreigners? Because a lot of them will tell you, no, we just want jobs.
Sure. That's a good question. And if one looks at the research in terms of assessing attitudes, it's very interesting that, I said earlier I was involved in research in the late 1990s. What we found in that research was that strong xenophobic attitudes were held by about 27% of the population across all demographics and race groups, interestingly. What we found in the research that came from targeted I think a large national survey that was conducted last year that was meant to inform the government's national action plan is about 27% again hold these harsh viewpoints. Then there's significant numbers who are ambivalent, about 30-odd% that are ambivalent. About 20% of the respondents are liberal, except that there should be some kind of engagement with foreigners, they should be allowed here. And the remaining 25% plus who are aware that foreigners have rights, but very concerned about the issues of the pressures that this puts on South Africa's socioeconomic conditions and prospects for employment and so forth. So there's a mixed bag out there, but I think the concern is that there is a significant chunk of people who harbor deeply offensive and problematic viewpoints.
Right.
Now, some of these, of course, come from lived realities, but some of these are manipulated for particular purposes which go beyond the kind of altruistic representations about improving employment for other South Africans.
Exactly. And I mean, we know that there are some connected to the government that are happy to use foreigners as a scapegoat to cover up their own failings for not creating the jobs that they promised and for, corruption in general. But at this point, do you think the government is really able to fix this situation, especially given how badly the South African economy is struggling?
Yes, I think this is an important point, that the situation has got worse in the context of COVID, and particularly given that 5 million jobs have been lost during this period. And this puts enormous pressure on South Africans, on South African politicians, and on the economy to deliver. So what we are seeing is certainly indicative of those pressures that are out there. But I'm quite certain that the approach that is being taken by certain individuals to use violence to try and get their way, and this is simply going to be counterproductive for job creation in South Africa.
Piers Pigou, great to have you. Thanks so much for taking the time. We appreciate it.